Community Theatre in Middletown. And this is the interviewer, Ed Strother. Today I'm talking with Mrs. William Hanna. I knew her first as Ann Crapo. Today is August 13th, 1985. It is about 3:40 in the afternoon. Ann and I have already spent a couple of hours together, and she fixed a marvelous lunch of quiche and fresh fruit, and we had a nice columbard with it as well. It's been a delightful day here in her apartment at the Halteman Villa out on Wheeling. Beautifully air-conditioned, but outside the temperature, I would imagine, is about 85. And it's time I stop talking and ask you a question. First of all, we want to learn a little bit about you, the person. You grew up in Muncie, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Where was your home?
First of all, 300 Riverside Avenue, and then 4300 West Jackson Street.
Okay, Riverside Avenue, and then Jackson Street. Well, that was the home I knew, wasn't it? Out on the we called it the Crapo place.
Yes, it's where Riverside and Jackson intersect.
All right. That many people in town, I think, remember as being a very beautiful place. Incidentally, who is living there now?
We have tenants at the farmhouse, and there are about 3 women that live at the house through the week.
Well, certainly.
Doing, household chores, secretarial work, that kind of thing.
But you chose not to sell that estate.
Not at this time, no.
Well, it's certainly a beautiful place. And every time I drive by, I think of the time I visited you when you were in a production at the college. That first production, I think, that you were in was The Beautiful People. Do you recall the role you played?
Yes, I do. St. Agnes of the Mice. I'll never forget it. I didn't mind mice, but I was terrified of mousetraps. And I had to, on stage, set a mousetrap. And that was worse than any bracket of lines I've ever had to learn. I knew it was going to go off as I backed away from it.
Yeah.
It was a very traumatic moment for me.
This was a play by William Saroyan, who was kind of the absurdist of his day, and I was very much into William Saroyan. Do you recall any of the college performers who were in the play with you?
Well, we had Adolph Kerber, Ben, John Plummer. I was the only woman.
Yes, I remember.
The only, female.
And I remember
we were very compatible.
Yes.
We had a great time.
Oh, I thought you were going to say
I wish any one of them could have set the mousetrap.
Yes. Well, it didn't work out that way. Also, in that first year, which was my first year at Ball State, you were in Laura down at Civic Theatre.
Yes.
Was it that year or the following spring?
Well, we did The Beautiful People in 46. I'd say probably October, maybe early November of 46. We did Laura 47, January 21st of 47, which opened the theater after it had been dark through the war years.
Oh, was this the first play after? I see. Yeah. I didn't realize I was witnessing a landmark in the history of Muncie Civic at that time. Well, you were a student at Ball State and a graduate of what school?
I had come from Pine Manor Junior College in Wellesley, Massachusetts.
Oh, I'd forgotten all about that. And before that?
I had gone to Northwestern.
Well, you got around then.
Yes, I did.
Who did you work with at Northwestern? Do you recall?
Oh, Ed, we've talked about this before. We had Ted Fuchs. We had the woman.
Krause, Elvina Krause.
Yes.
She was the acting teacher.
Yeah.
And a
Yeah.
marvelous teacher.
Mhm.
I never did have her
Yeah.
as a teacher, but all the people with whom I've talked who have had experiences with her really raved about her skill
Mhm.
as a teacher. Also, you as a person you graduated from Ball State. Shortly thereafter, married Bill,
Mhm.
and you have 5 children now.
Mhm.
2
Yes.
boys, 3 girls.
And 3 girls, right.
And the one I know best is Cindy.
Yes.
And I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about what Cindy is doing right at the moment.
Well, Cindy is very, very much into her continuing career. Basically, her commercials. She loves them. She's become very adept in the art of filming commercials, which I didn't realize involved so much. It's really a very precise art. There's no time to redo and redo. She's a very quick study, and I think perhaps that's why she has been able to procure so many of these lovely roles, because she can look for the brief time that the commercial would be running at her audience, which first of all would be the cameraman, crew, as they weed down, say, second call, recall, the final one, the producers are there. And it's really best not to be reading from a script when the producers are there. It's much in your favor if you have the eye-to-eye contact, because then they see what they're going to see on camera. And she loves it.
Well, I know you know these things firsthand because you were recently in a commercial with her.
Yes.
It took place in Amsterdam, what?
Yes, in Holland. Yes,
Talk about that
Panadol.
for a while, yeah.
Um,
The Panadol commercial.
She asked if I would, if this happened, if I would come with her. I said, oh, sure. And we went over. We were there for a week. And it was a very interesting, very, very grueling. I had no idea that they really put in the long, long hours they do. When you see that commercial, which runs just about 2 minutes, and you start at 7 in the morning on location and wind up at about 9:30 at night, still on location, and then you're going to edit all of this down to that brief couple of minutes.
Yeah.
I was totally intrigued by it. Mm-hmm. I don't think that I would have had the stamina to do this. It isn't so much the repetition of the lines as it is the setting up. You spend hours setting up the cameras, getting the lighting just right in the various locations, and you travel. Mm-hmm. You go by van from one location to another. Your viewing audience isn't aware of this. They simply see something that apparently happened in a brief moment of one day. You've spent a week going back and forth to these spots. It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, it might seem funny to slip from something of the recent past to the distant past, but did you ever have the pleasure of working with Irene Belcher when you were growing up in Muncie?
I knew Irene, of course. It was an aunt of my father's who literally got Irene started in children's theater.
Didn't know that.
And that was we called her Aunt Al, Alice Fisher. She was married to Will Harcourt, who was a Shakespearean actor. He also had a hobby of designing boats and designed the Ranger, which was the all-time winning boat for the Vanderbilt family. They had no children. Aunt Al had come to New York at age 16. She stood 6 feet in her stocking feet, big girl. About her first acquaintance, upon coming to the city, was Edwin Booth. She founded a club called 12th Night Club, which was a club for actresses. And it
now
was,
you're speaking of New York City, coming to the city.
Yeah. And it was a club where the women could come in for tea in any afternoon. And I was there first when I was 14 years old. A charming place. I'll never forget the afternoon. I was introduced once a month. They invited a male presence to come in and speak to the women, or, just be there to talk to them while they were having tea. That particular afternoon, the male guest happened to be Clark Gable.
Now you were 14 at this time.
And it happened to be simultaneous with the year that Gone with the Wind came out. Premiered, I should say. I also met a perfectly darling little woman whose name was Mrs. Brown. Brown with an E. And then I met her perfectly lovely, lovely daughter. Still the epitome to me of any person in the theater, Helen Hayes. And it was ironic because when Cindy graduated from the American Academy, it was Helen Hayes who gave her diploma. And I think that's kind of interesting.
Oh, yeah. I would agree.
And what goes around comes around.
Now, you got here because of an aunt of yours, right? And she is the one who helped Irene get started.
Irene had 2 little girls, Judy and Molly. We all know Judy and Molly. Irene loved theater. They're little girls. They're growing up. She was beside herself. She really could not see herself ever having anything except 2 little girls. Aunt Al came to Muncie. Mother had Irene come out for tea. And Aunt Al said, why not start a children's theater? And Irene used to love to tell this story. She said, what do you mean? And Aunt Al said, well, a theater for children. And then you can bring your own little girls. You won't have this feeling of being tied down at home with them. You can do what you want to do, have your little girls involved. And that was the way it started for Irene.
But you didn't work with Irene.
No, I was never really involved with Irene.
Did Cindy ever work with
you? Oh, yes, from age 6 on. No, when I was growing up, we had Titus was her last name.
Rita Scott Titus.
Yes. And she had a form of a children's theater. And her choice of material was not necessarily dedicated to children. For example, we did Romeo and Juliet.
That's grown up.
Yes. It isn't the magic that Irene always tried to and was terribly successful in incorporating in her children's theater. I have seen little children that have been overweight. They've been cast in the role of a butterfly. They've had a beautiful costume put on them, a black light on stage, and they are the butterfly. They're not.
I remember seeing 1 or 2 of Irene's shows, not as many as I should have. I want to slip over from college theater, beyond children's theater, over to Civic Theater. Do you recall which year you were president of the board of Muncie Civic Theater?
1966-67 season.
All right. Let's talk about that year in particular. Can you identify any special problem that the board was faced with during that time?
Well, we were redoing the Constitution.
That seems to be a hobby
That
of many
seems to be, I think, in any organization, whether it's needed or not, you redo the Constitution. That year, we did get new seats in the theater. We put a sound system in and a new roof. And I think probably all things were appreciated.
How was the membership that year? Up or down? Or?
It was up. It was up.
So
we have to remember, those were, well, not early Emmons years, but we were in definite competition with Emmons.
Yes.
So, of course, your average public audience, I do think, felt, well, Civic Theater has been here for so long, we can always see Civic Theater. But maybe we want to spend our money on seeing what shows being brought in from out of town. And I don't blame them. We all have memberships.
Mm-hmm.
But by the same token, we had something else in Civic Theater.
It's true.
We had a marvelous feeling of working together, being together, contributing something.
Mm-hmm. Did you run into special problems, or problems that you didn't seem to be able to work out?
No.
So that all problems were solvable?
Yes, well, I think ultimately they have to be, you know. No, not during that time. We had no stumbling block that I can recall.
When you think of serving as its president, what people do you identify as being especially helpful at that time? I know you don't want to leave out anybody, but let's go ahead and be nasty about it and identify 2 or 3 people who were especially helpful to you.
Well, of course, coming in as president, you don't start off with a new board.
True.
It's a 3-year board. So there are those that are serving out a second term, those that are there for 1 more year.
Mm-hmm.
Those people are vital.
Yes.
Jan Etchison, Helen Myers, Irene Belcher, everyone that had been there before me and the others coming in for a first term, extremely helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Extremely.
When you think back upon that year, is there anything you wish you might have been able to do and didn't quite get done? When I think of my own work, I think of a dozen things that I
know it. I suppose...
You don't have to answer that.
At the time... No, I suppose at the time... You would think, oh gosh, you know, why couldn't I have done more?
Mm-hmm.
But this theater still survives.
True.
So apparently what you did didn't hurt it in any way.
Right. Do you recall what the membership was at that time? That is the number
I
of people.
remember our theater, if I'm not mistaken, Ed, does it seat 23?
It seats around 800.
800 people, okay,
Mm-hmm.
okay. We had full houses.
Mm-hmm.
We had full houses every night.
Well, you had good support at that time.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah. And the matinees, too, the Sunday afternoon matinees.
So you did 4 performances then. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and
Sunday
matinee.
afternoon. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that's
And-
still
yeah.
a tradition. And of course, that special dress rehearsal where they have invited
Well, yes.
guests coming in. And even that's a pretty big night, as I recall, a pretty big performance time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me ask this question then. When you think, not in terms of people, but think in terms of concepts of Muncie Civic Theatre, to what do you attribute its long life? It has existed now since 1931.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow or other, for those 50-some years, we have to say something is responsible for that. How do you account for that?
I would answer that by saying I still believe that people like live entertainment.
All right.
Whether it's an outlet for the performer, the person who works backstage, in any form, costumes, makeup, furniture, whatever. It's a recreation for them. You're making a contribution to the community.
True.
And I believe this is why it was started.
Well, when I've done a little investigating of other groups that have performed in Muncie, and there were amateur groups who were performing before the turn of the century. And there was the Muncie Club that was performing early within this century. I think they did 4 or 5 shows. But they appear to have been short-lived. Muncie Civic Theatre has gone on. And I think you're right, of course, that there is a greater sense of dedication. It belongs to all of the people. And belonging to all of the people, as it does at this time, they're going to assure its continuance and its success. Another question that occurs to me. You were in one of the productions I directed at Civic, maybe more than one, but the one I remember best is The Innocents. And, well, you were also in Chalk Garden.
And the Miracle Worker.
And The Miracle Worker, yes. Well, the list grows. But for some reason or other, The Innocents came to me first, maybe because of my affection for Doug and Irene Belcher, who worked backstage on that show. But when you think of undertaking a production like this, would The Innocents play as well in Civic Theatre today as it did at that time?
Of course, to me it was totally fascinating, being an adaptation of Henry James' Turn of the Screw, which is probably the most famous ghost story ever written. I can tell you, quite frankly, why I was very intrigued by the script. It happened to be right after our president, John F. Kennedy, was shot. I affiliated with violence. We were all shocked at his death. Didn't believe that anything like this could happen. When this script appeared, I thought, how interesting. And if there is anything that I can do to help interpret violence, I'd very much like to be a part of it. I also had to decide whether the governess, Miss Giddens, was totally insane. I think we had to decide this about Oswald. But I much prefer the connotation with the ghost. Because my father had long been associated with people in England that spoke of ghost. Oh, well, a 300-year home was a baby. The older homes, oh yes, the carriage, the horses would come up on the gravel driveway by night. You'd hear them. The mirrors would cloud over. I had listened to those stories as a small child, and I believed them because they were being told to me by totally irrational people who believed them. I chose to interpret Miss Giddens as being totally rational. And I think when you do any role, well, I think any play is basically interpretation. You are telling a story. You are interpreting the author's words. You don't necessarily want to influence somebody, or your audience, but you want to interpret, tell the story, give them something to think about.
Sure. When you think back of all of the roles that you might have been, that you did create for Civic Theater, is there a particular role that you remember with greatest affection?
Oh, Annie Sullivan, of course.
I remember that, and I just felt so sorry for you because I thought, your shins were going to come out black and blue and that, and you repeatedly refused to wear shin guards.
I tried those, but those were bulky, and you knew. Performance nights, you're not going to be wearing them, so you might as well get used to the kicks, and I wanted those kiddies to kick.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have been real if they hadn't.
And you worked with two different young ladies. The one I can remember little Evie, her name.
Yes.
I forgot her first name. Elizabeth Evie.
And Vicki Yoakum.
One
was 11 and one was 9. Vicki was the older of the two. I've been asked many, many times which child I preferred, and I have never given the answer.
Well, that's smart, never to give that answer.
They were individually unique.
Yes, they
Each
both had their redeeming features that were winning in their ways. I think also this was the show that had the first black performer on stage at City.
Yes.
And I can't recall her
name. We had
name.
two. We had the woman who did Viney.
Right.
And we had the little boy who did Percy.
That's right. Well, that was her son, I believe. I'm not sure.
And they were wonderful.
Yes.
They were wonderful.
Well, I think I might agree with you. I think The Miracle Worker was a very, very fine experience for me as a director.
It was a challenging role because, number one, I felt it was necessary to learn the manual alphabet for the deaf. I thought, well, if there's somebody out in the audience that knows the manual alphabet for the deaf, I'd best be able to do this on target. And so that was interesting. And it's something I've never forgotten.
You still hang on to it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you use it?
Oh, oddly enough, our Julie, our second daughter, living in Lexington, became interested in this because she had read my manual alphabet for the deaf. Was in school in Lexington, got very interested in helping the deaf children. And she has a marvelous account of the night that she took a group of about 12 kiddies to a basketball game. And now she's using numbers and teams. And it was great. So I think, that maybe that helped her, interested her, provoked her wanting to help others.
Sure. We have only about a minute and a half or 2 minutes. Have I neglected to ask you something I should have asked you, Ann? Or do you think we've pretty well covered it? I know we could talk for another half hour.
Oh, at least.
And have another slice of quiche.
Yes. But, no, I don't think you've neglected to ask a thing. And I don't want to neglect saying what I'm going to say. That to me, you are absolutely the finest director, Ed. You
Oh,
really
I
are.
love you, Anne.
Well, I often said I would never consider doing anything unless you directed it.
Oh, bless you.
Well, for many
Hey,
reasons.
coming at this time in my life, that's one of the kindest things you could say.
No, but for many reasons I've always said it, because you're so, you learn with you. I had a couple of other experiences with directors. They expected you to know everything. You didn't.
That's very kind of you, but I'm going to have to turn you off now, lest I be unable to conclude, you see. This is Ed Strother, and I have been talking with Ann Crapo Hannah on August 13th, 1985.